Hello, everyone. So glad you come to join us and stop by to watch the video. We have a special guest today for our two authors, books and a beverage. I have coffee with, let me tell you, it has Irish cream in it.
That's my favorite because I got my Irish woman
Oh,
on,
yeah,
and
yeah.
I just have wine because it was just handy. So,
And our guest, Dave Belts, is here with your beverage, Dave. What are you
Well,
drinking?
it's just water tonight.
Oh, healthy stuff, huh?
but
Going.
Yeah,
healthy, yeah.
yeah. Dave comes to us from Utah.
Mhm.
He writes vampire fiction, right?
Well, there are vampires in a number of my books. Yeah, but
Okay, all
mostly
Would
I
right.
you
write horror.
would you
Okay.
classify it? Oh, sorry, Judy. Would you
That,
classify it as horror or vampire books?
No, horror. I actually
Okay.
classify it as Latter-day Saint horror, meaning that all the protagonists are Latter-day Saints, and there's there's a strong religious element to it. But vampires are figure in, let's see, one, two, three, four of my books. So
Okay.
five. Well, the one I'm writing right now, there will be a vampire in it. That's a bit of a spoiler, but
okay, so you've got,
Especially if it's not right off. Okay, Judy, what were you going to say?
yeah, how many books do you have published?
I have 10 books published. My 11th book will come out as soon as the publisher's done with the edits. And well, we're still waiting on the final cover, but it's supposed to come out this month. So hopefully it'll stay on track. If not, it'll be out next month. I'm currently working on my 12th book,
Wow, 12.
which is
Wow.
I just hit
Okay.
100,000 words, so I'm getting close to the end.
Okay, good. So question, who's your publisher? Who do you publish with?
I have three publishers. Um, my Most of my vampire fiction, if you will, is published by Parables. They're a small publisher in Maryland.
Okay.
Um, I have a publisher called Inksmith, which is publishing my one science fiction novel and The Witch of White Lady Hollow with the two sequels. The second book in the series comes out. That's the one coming out next month, and that's under contract with Inksmith. And my third publisher is V&E Enterprises. Um, they published The Executioner of God,
Okay.
which came out last year, but
Okay.
so it's kind of all over the place. Um, but yeah,
Are
Okay.
you
Well,
a
tell us
fast
about,
writer? I'm
well,
sorry.
go ahead, Judy.
Are you a fast writer? Do you write fast?
it takes me about a year to write a
Does
book.
that look like a mighty thick book? Let me see it
Yes.
again.
This one was an exception. I don't. Here's the my latest release, and it's quite a bit thinner.
Yeah.
Yeah. This one was so thick, and that was one of the reasons why I went with a different publisher, um, because it spans. We pick up the story in the 15th century and it goes all the way to the 21st, and
Oh,
the main characters a 13th century Templar and a 15th century Irish nun are moving forward in time. It's not a time travel book per se, but they're moving forward in time every 60 years, roughly. And um, and every time they appear, they're there for about 6 months, usually. And I just couldn't give any one of those periods a short shrift. I was doing so much. I was enjoying the research on that book so much because I had to know what they were wearing down to their underwear half the time.
right.
There's a chapter set in the worst hurricane that Nova Scotia has ever had, and it was in 1775. And knowing what the nun would have been wearing, because the nun they're having to travel incognito. They can't go about as religious. That's a noun. He's not a monk. Monks live in a monastery, but he has the same types of vows: poverty, obedience, and chastity. And but they couldn't go about in that guise, so they wear what relatively well-dressed people would wear at that time. And at the time, she had a wooden framework around her hips. It was really fascinating. A wooden framework around her hips, and they're in the middle of this hurricane with this gigantic skirt, and she actually gets picked up by the hurricane and thrown out into the bay. And so that was actually significant. That's one of the things I tried. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it sounds like a lot of research. Do you get lost in your research? Like, do you go down the rabbit hole of research? Okay. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. So you're normal, like all of us.
I love doing the research. I'm obsessive about it. I want to get every detail that I can right. There's a scene where they're crossing, they're on the Transcontinental Railroad, and they're passing through Utah. And I needed to know what they ate, because they're traveling first class, and they're in the dining car, and I actually found a menu for the Transcontinental Railroad dining car that was within 2 years of the time that they're passing through. So
wow,
they had what they were eating on there. I think it was mutton chops in tomato sauce. It's the way it was written. Tomato sauce.
Oh, okay.
And pears, canned pears for dessert, or bottled pears for dessert. Anyway, really interesting to figure out what they'd be eating, what they'd be doing. Maeve, the nun, is fascinated with firearms, and so every time she appears, once firearms are introduced, every time she appears, she's thrilled to find out, well, what do they have now? And there's this fun little scene on the Transcontinental Railroad where she comes to the rescue. Tormund, that's the knight. He's not around at the moment. She comes to the rescue of a Ute woman who's traveling alone and is being accosted by two ruffians. And she pulls out her, it's a Colt. I don't remember the exact nomenclature at the moment, but she pulls out a Colt, and and the first ruffian, she's talking about how, well, this makes me, a little lady like me, this makes me the equal of you two big brutes. And the one says, oh, you ain't even cocked it yet. And she says, well, you see, that's the interesting thing. This one, which had only been in existence for 2 years, this one is a single action. All I have to do is pull the trigger.
Are all your books in that time period? Do you have any contemporaries?
Oh, yeah. Most of them are contemporary. The vampire trilogy, The Children of Lilith, is set in modern day Utah. There are of course immortal characters. The female protagonist is 270 years old, so we get flashbacks to Scotland. There are other characters that are older than that. In my mythos, vampires don't tend to live very long, because 150 is about the average. Anything older than that, they're called ancient ones. It's not that they age, it's just that if you're in my mythos, the vampires choose to become serial killers. There's no animal blood cop out that we've heard about in some other popular books and movies. Mm-hmm. It's got to be human blood. And so anybody who chooses to become a serial murderer for whatever reason they want to be a vampire, they want immortality, whether it's power, love, youth, or whatever. They don't have any other moral compunctions. And as time goes on, they go for the next thrill, and eventually they get bored. And so most of them will end their lives. No, there's a one that goes back to 900 AD. There's one that goes back to 4000 BC. There are some old ones. but Laura McDonald at 270, it's considered ancient.
Wow, that's the most I've learned about vampires.
Well, I have my own theory, my own mythos about them. So there's flashbacks in those books. The Sweet Sister set in 2015, but there's an immortal character who's not a. There are three immortal characters who are not vampires, and they go back to 61 AD. And eventually, we get flashbacks, and we get back to 61 AD, where their story really starts, and so I'm doing a lot of that. And Enchantress of Ravens is set all in modern day 2022. Excuse me, 2020. Yeah, 2022, and there are things. I mentioned COVID. I try to set things in the real world. Yes, there's a supernatural.
Right. Oh, I see.
But I try to set things in the real world, and there are real world consequences to what's going on. It's a post-COVID.
Judy, you went really dark. I'm sorry, David. You went really dark and we can't see you anymore, Judy.
I'm not sure why either. I've noticed that.
Sorry, David. I didn't want to.
Right.
Sorry, I'm calling you David. See, I told you I would.
No problem.
Yeah, see, everybody, my son's name's David, so that's why I call him that. So your power didn't go off?
No, I didn't have it plugged in. Maybe that's why. So let me see if I can.
There you go. We can see you there.
Did it work now?
Yeah.
Wow. Oh,
Oh,
no. Wonder what that's all about.
I wonder if you have a short somewhere.
No, I think
You
I don't
might
have
just
enough
have
light
something
in
that's
here.
adjusting for the lighting.
Yeah, I think I don't have enough light in here, so
Okay.
let me turn the light on. Maybe
And
that'll.
meanwhile, while she's turning the light on, you continue. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
There,
I have-
that worked.
I
I'm
have,
sorry, Nick, I'm sorry.
It's all right. Most of the novels are set in contemporary times. The Witch series is set in 1978, though, for some very specific reasons. And we pick it up again in 1983 or 1982, or no, 1983. Then we pick it up again in 1987. There are very specific reasons why I'm setting it in that time period.
I have one last question to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
How did you get hooked on writing about these vampires?
Well, I had an image in my head of a vampire being initiated, and there were two things. It was a very dark image, and there were two things I knew absolutely. Was that it was kind of like he was in a dark place, and there was a circle of vampires placing their hands on his head as if they were ordaining him. That doesn't have anything to do with what happens in the books, okay?
Oh.
But that was the image that I had, and I knew two things. Number one is that vampirism has to be a deliberate choice, and number two, this was a story about the only person in history who didn't choose it. That's one thing I've never liked about the vampire myth is you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, you get bit on the neck. Oops, I'm down. No, you choose it. But this guy did not. And it took me literally 10 years to put this to paper because I couldn't quite get that to gel in my head, how he could be an unwilling vampire and it still has to be voluntary. And I moved to Utah. I was trying to write it as a mainstream horror book, but then it suddenly clicked in my head. This guy is a Latter-day Saint. He's like me, and once I did that, and I put the idea of Latter-day Saint theology into it, boom, everything just snapped into place. A year later, I had a book. A year after that, I had a publisher.
Really?
And it was, that's how I got started with it. I read Dracula when I was 9. it was a long slog for a 9-year-old to
Yeah,
get through
yeah.
that book.
Right, yeah.
But I got through it and I loved it, and I've read it, 8 or 9 times since. Uh, that had a great influence on me. But the only things I kept about, I went back to the Hebrew myths of Lilith, the mother of all vampires, and the main thing, the only Hollywood elements that I kept were the fangs.
Yeah.
My vampires have white feathered wings because Lilith did 1,000 years before anybody thought of putting wings on angels. The vampires had wings in Hebrew mythology. So I got to thinking, well, wow, that's something Lilith could use. I'm a heavenly messenger. Anyway.
Okay, I have another question before
Go
we.
ahead.
Okay, so are you a member of the Utah League of Writers?
You're not.
You're not, and do you just not want to? Are you in? Okay, let me put this another way. Are you with any other writing chapters or anything? Or are you just solo?
No, I have we have a small group. There are 4 of us that called the Horror Huddle, and we write dark fiction.
Mhm.
And that's my critique group, and that's we meet every 2 weeks. Although I do have critique partners that are not my genre. My best
Right.
ones actually are romance writers. When
Nothing
I was
wrong with
writing,
that.
no, but when I was writing The Sweet Sister, I realized I had a book that had a lot of classic romance elements in it. It was still going to be a horror book, but I wanted to be kept honest about certain elements. So I reached out and got a couple of romance critique partners, and we've been exchanging chapters. We've been exchanging chapters ever since.
Okay.
Then I got
That's great.
contacted to write a short story for a romance anthology, and I said, I write horror stories, right? And I said, yeah, and they said, okay. So I wrote one with a strong vampire twist that had a tie-in to the Children of Lilith, and they wrote back and they said, we love your story, but it's not romance. And I said, what do you mean it's not romance? I said, this guy's in love with he's in love with his wife. It's a story of how they met and how they married, and she's been dead, yes, for quite a while, but he's going on and trying to be true to her memory and all that. And I said, yeah, but the thing that they said was the story should be ending at the first kiss, at the proposal, or at the altar. And I said, well, I guess I broke that rule, because this is about a guy
Yeah.
who's still in love with his wife that died more than 100 years before. And with The Witch of White Lady Hollow, I wrote a story. It was strong. There were strong romance elements in it, but the main characters are a 17-year-old girl and her divorced mother, and there's some strong romance elements in it. But the romance that works out is not the 17-year-old girls, and
Yeah.
but she meets the man literally in the last chapter that she's going to marry, and she's going to marry him at the end of the story. And when I wrote the sequel, I decided to just skip the courtship and write a story about a romance with a young married couple, 6-month-old baby, both of them starving students at BYU, and that was the romance that I wanted to tell, about these two people who are struggling but very much in love.
Sounds intriguing, and
Yeah.
I need you to tell us more about that on our Facebook, because our
Yep.
time is up now.
Okay.
But it sounds so intriguing.
Yeah.
So will you tell our readers more about it on our Facebook? And the other thing I wanted to mention, all your stuff behind you. Wow.
That's cool.
That looks,
Yeah.
that's pretty
Well,
cool.
I teach
Yeah.
classes on ancient weaponry
Oh,
and
That's
at writers'
awesome.
conferences and Renaissance fairs. And I have an arsenal of about 95 pieces.
Oh,
Oh my goodness.
And
whoa.
we
So
cart
you
the
can,
whole thing off to to these fairs and writers' conferences. And I teach
Wow.
a class, and um, I've kind of
yeah.
there's a student
That's
plate mail out in the hallway and 4 helmets and a 13.5 foot pike that I couldn't possibly fit into my office. So
wow, that's so interesting. I'm
That's
so glad
some,
you showed it to
yeah,
us.
I have
that's
a very
fun.
indulgent life, and when I was writing a book about a 61 AD Roman officer in the Roman army in Britain, she said, "Okay, well, what do you need?" And I said, "I need a full set of first century Roman armor and weapons and so on." And she said, "Okay."
Wow, that is
Cool.
that's really
That's
cool.
really
I'm
cool.
so glad you showed it to us.
Yeah.
Mary will show everybody your website, your
Yep.
how your link and where to find your books they're on Amazon, I'm assuming, and other places.
Amazon. They're all on Amazon. I have
Okay,
two audiobooks out right now. The third one should come out this month.
Oh,
great,
The
great.
first
good.
one is The Unwilling, which is the first volume of the Children of Lilith trilogy. The Witch of White Lady Hollow, which has no vampires in it. That one's out, and The Sweet Sister comes out, which also has no vampires in it.
Great.
Should come out
Oh,
this month.
we're looking forward to hearing more about
Yes.
it on Facebook. So let
Yes,
us
we
know. So
are.
we have to
And this,
run now.
and this interview will be up probably later tonight because I gotta fix my dinner for my husband first.
Okay.
So, okay.
Thank you
Thank you
so much,
so
Dave. We
much.
appreciate you showing up and telling
Thank
us
you.
about all your books. Thank you.
Thank you.